One bullet, one boardroom, one impossible choice. What would you do if the man who could destroy your career was the only man who could save your life? I'm Isabella Romano, and this is the story of how I fell in love with my enemy, the most dangerous billionaire in America. But before I tell you how it all began, you need to know how it almost ended, with his gun pointed at my heart and 3 words that changed everything. You're mine now. Let me take you back to where it all started. But before we dive into Isabella and Alessandro's intense love story, do me a quick favor. We are on a mission to get to 1,000 subscribers. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button to get notified of our stories. Trust me, you'll want to catch every minute of this explosive romance, and I've got so many more addictive stories coming your way. Now, let's get into it. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Morrison and Associates' 45th floor conference room, each drop a tiny explosion against the glass. Manhattan sprawled below like a circuit board of ambition and desperation, its lights bleeding together in the September storm. Isabella Romano stood with her back to the view, arms crossed, dark eyes fixed on the mahogany door as if she could will it to remain closed. It didn't work. The door swung open with the kind of confidence that announced its occupant before he even appeared. Alessandro Caruso entered the room like he owned it, which, Isabella realized with a sinking feeling in her stomach, he probably would by the end of the day. He was taller than his file photo suggested, at least 6'3", with the kind of build that came from discipline rather than vanity. His suit was Tom Ford midnight blue, cut so precisely it might as well have been a second skin. But it was his face that made Isabella's breath catch. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, and eyes the color of aged whiskey that seemed to see straight through every defense she'd spent 5 years building. Miss Romano. His voice was smooth, touched with the faintest hint of an Italian accent that his years at Harvard hadn't quite erased. I've heard impressive things about you, Mr. Caruso. Isabella extended her hand, keeping her expression neutral even as her heart hammered against her ribs. I wish I could say the same. His smile was slow, dangerous. Honesty. I appreciate that. He took her hand, and the contact sent electricity shooting up her arm. His palm was warm, his grip firm but not crushing. He held on just a fraction of a second too long. Shall we discuss why you've been investigating my company for the past 6 months? Isabella's blood turned to ice, but she didn't let it show. She pulled her hand back and gestured to the conference table. Please sit. They took positions across from each other like chess players studying the board. Alessandro unbuttoned his jacket and leaned back in his chair with infuriating casualness. Isabella opened her leather portfolio and pulled out a thin folder. Caruso Enterprises, she began, her voice steady. Estimated net worth, $23 billion. Holdings in real estate, technology, hospitality, and import-export. Founded 15 years ago with what public records claim was a modest inheritance from your grandfather, Vittorio Caruso. She met his eyes. Except Vittorio Caruso was a capo in the Gambino crime family, and your modest inheritance was $50 million in laundered money. Alessandro's expression didn't change. Ancient history, Miss Romano. My grandfather's choices don't define my business practices. No, Isabella agreed. But your business practices do. 3 shell companies in the Cayman Islands. 24 properties purchased through intermediaries. Shipping contracts with companies that don't seem to exist beyond their corporate registrations. She leaned forward. You're very good at covering your tracks, Mr. Caruso. But not perfect. Careful. His voice dropped, losing its smooth charm. Accusations like that can have consequences. Is that a threat? It's a fact. He stood, buttoning his jacket. I came here today as a courtesy, Miss Romano. My lawyers informed me that Morrison and Associates has been retained by the Southern District to build a RICO case against me. I wanted to meet the woman foolish enough to think she could win. Isabella stood too, refusing to let him tower over her even though he had 8 inches on her 5'6" frame. I don't think I can win, Mr. Caruso. I know I can. And when I do, your empire will collapse like the house of cards it is. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise? Respect? Then it was gone, replaced by a look so intense it felt like a physical touch. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Isabella. The use of her first name felt intimate, dangerous. The world you're trying to expose, it doesn't play by courtroom rules. Then it's time it learned. Alessandro walked toward the door, then paused, his hand on the handle. I'm having a party this Friday at my penthouse. 8 o'clock. I'd like you to come. Isabella almost laughed. You're inviting your prosecutor to a party? I'm inviting a brilliant lawyer to a social gathering where she might learn that not everything is as black and white as her case files suggest. He smiled again, but this time it reached his eyes. Besides, know your enemy. Isn't that what Sun Tzu said? Consider it research. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving only the scent of expensive cologne and the feeling that her carefully ordered world had just tilted on its axis. Isabella stared at the closed door, her mind racing. She should refuse. She should report the invitation to her superior, Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Webb. She should do anything except what every instinct in her body was screaming at her to do. But Alessandro Caruso had just given her an opportunity that prosecutors dream about, access to his inner circle. And if there was one thing Isabella Romano didn't do, it was back down from a challenge. Even if the challenge came with whiskey-colored eyes and a smile that promised both heaven and hell. The elevator to Alessandro Caruso's penthouse required a special key card and a security code. Isabella provided both, courtesy of the invitation that had arrived at her apartment on Thursday, a heavy cream cardstock with embossed gold lettering that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The elevator was all glass and chrome, offering a dizzying view of Manhattan dropping away beneath her feet. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a black cocktail dress that was elegant but not seductive, with a neckline that suggested confidence rather than availability. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, diamond studs, her grandmother's, catching the light. She looked exactly like what she was, a professional woman attending a professional gathering. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. The elevator doors whispered open directly into Alessandro's penthouse, and Isabella stepped into another world. The space was enormous, all clean lines and understated luxury. Original artwork, she recognized a Rothko, a Kandinsky, hung on walls painted in shades of charcoal and cream. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered 360-degree views of the city, making it feel like they were floating above the world. The furniture was Italian, modernist, in shades of black and deep burgundy. And everywhere, there were people. Beautiful people, powerful people, the kind of people whose names appeared in the financial pages and society columns. They moved through the space like sharks in expensive clothing, drinks in hand, laughter like wind chimes in a storm. You came? Alessandro appeared at her elbow as if he'd been waiting. Tonight, he wore a black suit with a black shirt, no tie, the top button undone. It should have looked casual. Instead, it looked devastatingly elegant. I wasn't sure you would. I'm full of surprises, Isabella said. I'm counting on it. He handed her a glass of champagne, his fingers brushing hers.
Come.
Let me introduce you to some people who might change your mind about me. The next hour was a masterclass in perception management. Alessandro introduced her to tech entrepreneurs who praised his investments in artificial intelligence startups. Real estate developers who spoke glowingly of his urban renewal projects in Chicago and Miami. Even a congresswoman who credited his foundation's donations with saving 3 public schools in the Bronx. You're wondering if it's real, Alessandro murmured in her ear as they stood by the windows, watching the city lights sparkle like fallen stars. The philanthropy. The legitimate businesses. You're wondering if it's all just a cover. Isabella turned to face him, and suddenly, she was achingly aware of how close they were standing. Is it? The world isn't binary, Isabella. People aren't simply good or evil, guilty or innocent. His hand came up, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought he was going to touch her face. Instead, he gestured to the view. Look at this city. Every person down there has secrets. Every building houses both angels and demons. The only difference is that I'm honest about my shadows. Honest. She couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. You're admitting to criminal activity. I'm admitting to being human. His eyes met hers, and the intensity there made her breath catch. My grandfather was Mafia. That's true. The money that started my empire came from sources I can't be proud of. Also true. But the man I am today, the business I've built, I've spent 15 years making that clean. Making it real. Then let me see your books. Open your companies to audit. If you're really clean, prove it. Alessandro's laugh was low, humorless. You think it's that simple? The people my grandfather did business with, the families who remember the old alliances, they don't just let you walk away because you decided to go legitimate. There are obligations. Appearances that must be maintained. I've spent years building a buffer between who I was and who I want to be, and your investigation threatens to tear all of that down. So this. Isabella gestured to the party, to him, to the space between them. This is what? An attempt to make me back off.
No.
He said it simply, certainly. This is me trying to make you understand before you get hurt. I can take care of myself. Can you? His hand did touch her now, fingers light on her elbow, turning her to face the room. You see all these people? Half of them are connected to families you've never heard of. The other half owe favors to people who could end your career with a phone call. And somewhere in this room is someone who's wondering if you're becoming a problem that needs to be solved. Isabella's heart kicked against her ribs, but she kept her voice level. Are you trying to scare me, Mr. Caruso? I'm trying to protect you. His hand dropped, but his eyes stayed locked on hers. Because despite what you think, despite the investigation and the accusations, I don't want to see you hurt. You're brilliant and brave and entirely too stubborn for your own good, and if you keep pushing this case, you're going to stumble into something that even I might not be able to pull you back from. Before Isabella could respond, a commotion erupted near the elevator. A man she didn't recognize was arguing with one of Alessandro's security guards, his voice rising above the ambient music. Alessandro's expression shifted instantly from intimate concern to cold authority. "Excuse me," he said, already moving toward the disturbance. Isabella watched as Alessandro approached the argument, saw the way the room's energy changed. People stepped back, creating space. The angry man, middle-aged, expensive suit, face flushed with alcohol or anger, pointed a finger at Alessandro's chest. "You think you can just cut me out?" the man shouted. "We had a deal, Alessandro." "This isn't the time or place, Vincent." Alessandro's voice was quiet, but it carried. "We'll discuss this Monday in my office." "Fuck Monday. You owe me $2 million. Alessandro's hand shot out so fast Isabella almost missed it. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisted slightly, and suddenly Vincent was gasping in pain, his face white. Alessandro leaned in close, whispered something that Isabella couldn't hear, and then released him. Vincent stumbled back, cradling his wrist, and fled to the elevator without another word. The party resumed as if nothing had happened, but Isabella had seen the truth beneath Alessandro's polished exterior. The violence, the control, the casual way he'd hurt someone without a flicker of emotion. This was the real Alessandro Caruso, and she'd almost let herself forget it. She set down her champagne glass and headed for the elevator. She'd made it halfway across the room when Alessandro intercepted her. "Leaving so soon? I've seen enough," Isabella said coldly. "That wasn't what you think." "No? Because it looked like you just threatened a man and physically hurt him in front of 50 witnesses who will all swear it never happened." Alessandro's jaw tightened. "Vincent Marchetti has been embezzling from one of my subsidiaries. He came here drunk and belligerent. What did you expect me to do? Call the police? Press charges? Handle it through legal channels like a legitimate businessman would? And if I told you Vincent has connections to the Colombo family, that calling the police would start a war that could get innocent people killed?" He stepped closer, frustration evident in every line of his body. "This is what I was trying to explain. My world operates on different rules that don't fit in your nice, neat legal framework." "Then maybe you should get out of that world," Isabella shot back. "Maybe I'm trying to," Alessandro said quietly. "And maybe that's why I need you to understand before you tear it all down." They stood there in the middle of his penthouse, the party swirling around them like they were the still center of a hurricane. Isabella wanted to walk away, wanted to go home, write her report, and bury herself in the evidence that would put this complicated, dangerous, impossibly magnetic man behind bars. But she couldn't move, couldn't look away from those whiskey eyes that seemed to see every doubt, every fear, every traitorous flutter of attraction she was trying desperately to ignore. "Dance with me," Alessandro said suddenly. "What?" "One dance. Then you can leave, and I won't stop you." He held out his hand. "But give me 10 minutes to show you that I'm not just the monster you've decided I am." Isabella looked at his hand, at the lean fingers and the faint scar across his knuckles that spoke of old violence. Every rational instinct screamed at her to refuse. But curiosity, or was it something more dangerous, made her place her palm in his. He led her to the space by the windows where a few couples were swaying to the jazz quartet in the corner. The moment his arm came around her waist, Isabella knew she'd made a mistake. The contact was electric, impossible to ignore. He held her properly, respectfully, but there was nothing proper about the way her body responded to his proximity. "Why law?" he asked as they moved to the music. "Why dedicate your life to putting people like me away?" "My father," Isabella heard herself say, surprising herself with the honesty. "He was a detective with NYPD. Worked organized crime for 20 years. When I was 12, he testified against a capo named Frankie, the Knife Delgado." She met Alessandro's eyes. "2 weeks later, someone put 3 bullets in my father's chest outside our apartment building. He survived, but he was never the same. The fear, the constant looking over his shoulder, the way my mother cried every time he left for work. That's why I became a prosecutor. Because someone has to stand up to people who think violence is an acceptable solution to their problems." Alessandro was quiet for a moment, his hand warm against the small of her back. "I'm sorry about your father, but I'm not Frankie Delgado." "Aren't you?" Isabella challenged. "You just hurt a man because he challenged you. How is that different?" "Because I didn't kill him. Didn't even seriously hurt him. 20 years ago, my grandfather would have had him thrown off this balcony, and no one would have asked questions." Alessandro's expression was intense, almost pleading. "I'm trying to be better than that. Trying to build something that my children, if I ever have them, won't have to be ashamed of. But I can't do that if you destroy everything I've spent 15 years creating." The song ended, but neither of them moved apart. Isabella could feel the rise and fall of his chest, see the pulse beating in his throat. He smelled like cedar and something darker, spicier. Her hands were on his shoulders, and she could feel the solid muscle beneath the expensive fabric. "I can't drop the investigation," she whispered. "I know." His thumb brushed across her lower back, a touch so light she might have imagined it. "But I had to try." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Then Isabella pulled back, breaking the spell. "Thank you for the party, Mr. Caruso. And the dance." She headed for the elevator, not trusting herself to look back. But as the doors closed and the city dropped away beneath her, she heard his voice one more time, soft but clear. "This isn't over, Isabella." And God help her, she hoped he was right. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and a summons to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Isabella sat across from Marcus Webb, her supervisor, trying to ignore the anxiety gnawing at her stomach. Marcus was in his 50s, prematurely gray, with the weary eyes of a man who'd seen too many cases fall apart because of politics or procedural errors. "Tell me you didn't go to that party," Marcus said, without preamble. Isabella's heart sank. "How did you, Isabella?" He rubbed his temples. "Alessandro Caruso is under federal investigation. You're the lead prosecutor on that investigation. And you thought attending his private party was appropriate. It was an opportunity to gather intelligence." "It was a mistake." Marcus slammed his hand on the desk. "Do you have any idea how this looks? His lawyers could argue you're compromised, biased. They could get the entire case thrown out on the grounds that you've become personally involved with the target." "I'm not personally involved," Isabella protested, but the words felt hollow even to her own ears. She thought of the way Alessandro's hand had felt on her back, the intensity in his eyes, the way her pulse had raced when he'd asked her to dance. Marcus studied her face, and she saw his expression soften slightly. Isabella, you're one of the best prosecutors I've ever worked with. Brilliant legal mind, incredible instincts, and you've never lost a case. But Alessandro Caruso is different. He's not just another mobster. He's smart, he's connected, and according to our intelligence, he's trying to transition out of the life. Marcus leaned forward, which makes him both more dangerous and more sympathetic. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm reassigning the case. Effective immediately, you're off Caruso Enterprises.
No.
Isabella stood up, so fast her chair rolled backward. Marcus, I've spent 6 months on this investigation. I know every shell company, every questionable transaction, every connection. And that's exactly why you need to step back. You're too close to this, Isabella. I can see it in your face. Marcus's voice gentled. Take a week off. Clear your head. Then come back, and we'll find you another case. A good one. Just not this one. Isabella wanted to argue, wanted to fight, but she knew it would be pointless. Marcus had made up his mind. And maybe, she thought with a sick feeling in her stomach, he was right to worry. She collected her files, damn it, and walked out of the federal building into the drizzling rain. She was so lost in thought that she almost didn't notice the black Mercedes idling at the curb. Almost didn't see the back window roll down to reveal Alessandro's face. Get in, he said. Absolutely not.
Please.
5 minutes. I need to talk to you. There's nothing to talk about. I just got removed from your case, which I assume was your goal all along. Bitterness laced her words. Alessandro's expression tightened. I had nothing to do with that. But get in the car, Isabella. Trust me, you don't want to have this conversation on the street. Something in his tone made her look around. That's when she saw them. 2 men in a dark sedan parked across the street, watching her. Not cops. Something else. Something that made her skin prickle with warning. She got in the car. The interior was all leather and luxury, and Alessandro was sitting too close in the confined space. The car pulled smoothly into traffic. Who are those men? Isabella demanded. That's what I need to talk to you about. Alessandro's face was grim. How much do you know about the Vitali family? Chicago-based organization. Suspected involvement in drug trafficking, loan sharking, and at least 4 unsolved murders in the last decade. What about them? They've taken an interest in you. Specifically, in your investigation of me. Ice flooded Isabella's veins.
Why?
Because despite what you think, I've been trying to cut ties with the old families. That includes the Vitalis. 2 years ago, I stopped laundering money through a shipping company they have interests in. Last year, I refused to provide them with commercial properties they could use for distribution. I've been slowly, carefully extracting myself from their world. Alessandro's jaw was tight. But your investigation threatens to expose connections I've been trying to bury. And if those connections become public, it doesn't just hurt me, it hurts the Vitalis. They're not happy about it. So, what? They're going to kill a federal prosecutor to protect their interests? That's insane. It would bring down every law enforcement agency in the country on them. You're assuming they're thinking rationally. Alessandro turned to face her fully. Vincent Marchetti, the man from the party, he's connected to the Vitalis. He was feeding them information about my businesses, and when I found out, I cut him off. That's what the fight was really about. And now the Vitalis know that I know, and they're getting nervous. This is ridiculous. I don't need your protection, Isabella. Alessandro grabbed her hand, and the contact sent electricity up her arm. I've known men like this my entire life. I grew up in their world. And I'm telling you that you are in danger. Real danger. The kind that doesn't care about legal consequences or FBI investigations. Isabella looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. The concern there looked genuine. The fear looked real. What do you want from me? Come to Chicago with me. Tonight. I have to meet with Marco Vitali. He's the head of the family. I'm going to try to smooth this over. Make them understand that you're not a threat. But I need you there. I need them to see that you're under my protection. Under your protection? Isabella laughed, but it came out shaky. Alessandro, I'm not some mob girlfriend who needs a big, strong man.
This isn't about that.
His grip tightened on her hand. This is about survival. Mine and yours. Come to Chicago. Let me handle this. And then, if you still want to prosecute me, if you still think I'm the bad guy, I'll give you something. Give me what? The books you asked for. Complete financial records for every Caruso company. Every transaction for the last 15 years. He held her gaze. But only if you come to Chicago and let me keep you safe. Isabella's mind raced. It was insane. Dangerous. Possibly the biggest mistake of her career. But it was also an opportunity she'd never get again. Access to Alessandro's complete financial history and a chance to meet the head of one of Chicago's most dangerous crime families. And beneath all the logical arguments, there was something else. Something she didn't want to acknowledge. The way her heart raced when he was near. The way his touch made her skin burn. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, Alessandro Caruso wasn't entirely the monster she'd made him out to be. One condition, she said finally. I record everything. My phone stays on me at all times, and if you try to take it, the deal's off. Alessandro smiled, and it transformed his face from dangerous to devastating.
Deal.
We leave in 2 hours. Pack for 3 days. 3 days? I thought this was just a meeting. With the Vitales, nothing is ever just a meeting. He released her hand, and she felt the loss of contact like a physical ache. Besides, Isabella, if we're going to convince them you're under my protection, you'll need to look the part. And that means being seen with me.
Publicly.
Repeatedly. You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend? I want you to pretend to be whatever keeps you alive. His voice dropped, became almost tender. Please, Isabella. I know you don't trust me, but trust me on this. The car pulled up outside her apartment building. Isabella sat there for a moment, weighing her options. Walk away, and possibly end up dead. Or trust Alessandro Caruso, mob scion, billionaire, and quite possibly the most dangerous man she'd ever met. 2 hours, she said finally, reaching for the door handle. If you're late, I'm not waiting. Alessandro's smile was wolfish. I'm never late, Bella. Never. As Isabella walked into her building, she wondered if she'd just made the best decision of her life or signed her own death warrant. Possibly, she thought with a shiver that wasn't entirely from fear. It was both. Alessandro's private jet was exactly what Isabella expected. All cream leather and mahogany, with a full bar and a bedroom in the back that she tried very hard not to think about. They were wheels up within 20 minutes of her stepping aboard, Manhattan's lights falling away beneath them as they climbed into the darkening sky. Drink. Alessandro offered, pouring himself 2 fingers of scotch. I need to keep my head clear. Suit yourself. He settled into the seat across from her, looking entirely too comfortable. We should probably discuss the story. What story? How we met. How long we've been together. The details that will make this believable. He took a sip of his scotch. The Vitales have people everywhere. They'll check our story, look for holes. We need to be consistent. Isabella pulled out her phone and opened a notes app.
Fine.
How did we meet? The party. 3 months ago. One of my charity events. We do them quarterly. You were there representing a non-profit your firm supports pro bono. We talked. I was charmed by your intelligence and your complete lack of interest in my money. I pursued you relentlessly until you finally agreed to dinner. And I kept seeing you because? Alessandro's eyes gleamed. Because beneath my admittedly suspicious exterior, you found a man trying to build something legitimate. Someone whose past doesn't have to define his future. Someone who challenged you intellectually and made you feel things you'd never felt before. You've put a lot of thought into this fantasy, Isabella said dryly, even as her traitorous heart kicked up its pace. I'm a detail-oriented person. He leaned forward. And for the record, Isabella, only about half of that is fantasy. She refused to take the bait. What about the investigation? How do we explain that? You were removed from the case due to our relationship. Conflict of interest. Marcus Webb found out about us and reassigned you. You're furious with me because you feel like I cost you a major case. Alessandro smiled slightly. Actually, that part's not far from the truth. I'm not furious with you. The words came out before she could stop them. I'm confused. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? A monster. Isabella met his eyes. Someone who hurt people without remorse. Who used violence as a first resort instead of a last one. Someone who couldn't possibly understand concepts like honor or integrity. And now I think you might be the most complicated person I've ever met. She closed the notes app, which makes you either more dangerous or less. I haven't decided which yet. Alessandro set down his glass and moved to sit beside her. The close quarters of the jet made the proximity even more intense. Isabella could feel the heat of his body, see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw. I'm going to tell you something, he said quietly. Something I've never told anyone. Because if we're going to survive the next few days, you need to understand who I really am. Isabella waited, her journalist instinct screaming at her to record this, even as another part of her, the part that was dangerously close to caring about this man, just wanted to listen. When I was 15, Alessandro began, my grandfather took me to a warehouse in Red Hook. There was a man there, tied to a chair. He'd stolen from the family, my grandfather said. Taken money that didn't belong to him. And my grandfather handed me a gun and told me to kill him. Isabella's breath caught. What did you do? I threw up. Alessandro's laugh was bitter. Right there on the warehouse floor. And then I refused. I told my grandfather I wouldn't do it, that I didn't want any part of that life. He beat me so badly, I spent 3 days in the hospital. He touched his ribs unconsciously, as if he could still feel the old pain. But I didn't kill that man. And I never went back to Red Hook. But you took his money. Built your empire with blood money. Yes. Alessandro didn't flinch from the accusation. I was 18, Isabella. My grandfather died and left me everything. I could have walked away, could have refused the inheritance and made my own way. But I didn't. I took the money and I built something with it. And every day since then, I've been trying to wash the blood off. Blood doesn't wash off, Alessandro. I know. His hand found hers on the armrest, their fingers intertwining. But maybe if you work hard enough, you can build something clean enough, good enough, to outweigh the sins of your past. That's what I've been trying to do. That's what your investigation threatens to destroy. Isabella looked at their joined hands, felt the warmth of his palm against hers. Why are you telling me this? Because in Chicago, you're going to see things that will make you question everything you think you know about right and wrong. You're going to meet people who exist in shades of gray, so dark they're almost black. And I need you to remember that I'm trying to find my way toward the light, even if I'm not there yet. Before Isabella could respond, the pilot's voice came over the intercom, announcing their descent into Chicago. Alessandro released her hand and returned to his seat, and Isabella felt the loss of contact like a physical ache. As the jet descended through the clouds, Chicago's lights spreading beneath them like a jeweled net, Isabella wondered if she was falling for Alessandro Caruso or falling into a trap. And worse, she wondered if there was any difference. The car that met them at the private terminal was even more luxurious than Alessandro's Manhattan Mercedes, a Bentley with windows so darkly tinted that Isabella felt like she'd entered a mobile fortress. Alessandro's demeanor had changed since they landed, becoming harder, more alert. He checked his phone constantly, his jaw tight. The meeting is at midnight, he said without looking up. Vitali's private club in the Loop. Until then, we're staying at my apartment. You have an apartment in Chicago? I have apartments in 5 cities. He finally looked at her, and she saw the stress in his eyes. Isabella, when we get to the club tonight, stay close to me. Don't talk unless I tell you to. Don't ask questions. And whatever you see, whatever you hear, remember that we're there to make peace, not to gather evidence. I can't promise that. Then promise me you'll be smart. That you'll recognize when keeping quiet might save your life. The weight of what she was walking into finally hit her. Isabella had faced down murderers in courtrooms, had stared down defense attorneys and unsympathetic judges. But this was different. This was walking into the den of men who didn't believe in the legal system, who solved problems with violence and fear. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. Alessandro's expression softened. He reached over and took her hand.
Good.
"Fear keeps you alert. But I won't let anything happen to you, Isabella. I swear it." Alessandro's Chicago apartment was in a converted warehouse building in the West Loop, all exposed brick and modern fixtures. The view looked out over the Chicago River, the water reflecting the city lights like liquid fire. Isabella stood at the windows while Alessandro made phone calls in rapid Italian, his voice tense. When he finally hung up, he looked exhausted. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Define all right." He loosened his tie. "Marco Vitali has agreed to meet with us, which is good. But he's bringing his nephew, Dante, which is bad. Dante is unpredictable, violent. He thinks I'm weak for trying to go legitimate." "Are you weak?" Alessandro's eyes flashed. "I'm smart enough to know that the old ways are dying. The FBI, the RICO statutes, the surveillance technology, the age of the traditional mafia is over. The families that survive will be the ones that adapt, that find ways to make money without leaving bodies in their wake. And the families that don't adapt, they'll be the ones that end up in prison or dead." He moved to the bar and poured himself a drink. "Isabella, what I'm about to ask Marco tonight, to leave you alone, to accept that my businesses are off limits, it's asking him to show weakness. To admit that he doesn't control me anymore. Men like Marco don't do that easily. Then why are we here? If you don't think he'll agree. Because the alternative is war." Alessandro's voice was flat. "And in a war between me and the Vitalis, people die. Innocent people. People who have nothing to do with this life, but who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time." He drained his glass. "I've spent 15 years trying not to be my grandfather. I won't start by starting a bloodbath over a federal prosecutor who's trying to put me away." The words should have stung, but instead Isabella heard the truth beneath them. Alessandro was risking everything, his relationship with the Vitalis, his carefully maintained connections, possibly even his life, to protect her. A woman who was actively working to destroy him. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Why are you doing this for me?" Alessandro set down his glass and crossed to where she stood by the windows. He moved slowly, giving her time to step away. She didn't. "Because from the moment you walked into that conference room, looking at me like I was something scraped off your shoe, I knew you were different." His hand came up, fingers gentle as they traced the line of her jaw. "You're brilliant and brave, and you stand up for what you believe in, even when it might get you killed. You remind me of who I wanted to be before the world taught me that honor was a luxury I couldn't afford." Isabella's breath caught. "Alessandro." "And because," he continued, his thumb brushing across her lower lip, "I look at you, and I see the possibility of redemption. If someone like you could believe I'm capable of being better than my past, then maybe it's actually true." They stood there, inches apart, the city glittering behind them. Isabella knew she should pull away, knew that whatever was happening between them was dangerous, reckless, a violation of every professional boundary she'd ever set for herself. But when Alessandro leaned in, when his lips met hers in a kiss that was somehow both gentle and demanding, she didn't pull away. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, became something desperate and hungry, months of tension and denial spilling over in a single moment of surrender. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alessandro rested his forehead against hers. "This is insane," Isabella whispered. "Completely. I'm supposed to be prosecuting you. I know. And in a few hours, we're going to meet with a man who might decide to kill us both." "Also true." Alessandro smiled against her lips. "But right now, in this moment, all I can think about is how much I want to kiss you again." Isabella pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. In them, she saw desire, yes, but also something deeper. Something that looked almost like hope. "We should get ready for the meeting," she said, even as her body screamed at her to stay right where she was. Alessandro nodded, releasing her. "We should. The car comes at 11:30. But he didn't move, and neither did she, the space between them still charged with possibility and danger. Finally, Isabella stepped back. I need to change. Do you have something I can wear that looks appropriate? Alessandro's smile was slow, wicked. Bella, I have an entire closet of clothes for you. Sizes, shoes, everything. I had my assistant shop while we were in flight. Of course you did. Isabella shook her head, but she was smiling despite herself. You really do think of everything. I try. He gestured toward one of the bedrooms.
Go. Get ready.
And Isabella? He waited until she looked back at him. Whatever happens tonight, remember what I said. Stay close. Stay quiet.
And trust me.
As Isabella walked into the bedroom and saw the array of designer clothing laid out on the bed, including a stunning black dress that was somehow both elegant and seductive, she realized that trust was exactly what terrified her. Because she was starting to trust Alessandro Caruso. And in her world, trusting the enemy was the fastest way to get yourself killed. The Vitali family's private club was housed in an unmarked building in Chicago's Loop, sandwiched between a bank and a law firm. The irony wasn't lost on Isabella. Alessandro's hand was warm and steady on the small of her back as they were escorted through a nondescript door, down a hallway lined with vintage photographs of Chicago in the 1920s, and into a room that looked like it had been transported directly from a Godfather movie. Dark wood paneling, green felt tables, the smell of cigar smoke and expensive liquor. And at the center of it all, sitting at a round table like a king holding court, was Marco Vitali. He was older than Isabella expected, maybe 70, with silver hair slicked back and eyes like chips of black ice. He wore a suit that probably cost more than her car, and his hands, resting on the table in front of him, bore the scars of a man who'd done his own violence before age and status allowed him to delegate it. Standing behind him was a younger man who had to be Dante. Late 30s, handsome in a cruel way, with tattoos visible at his collar and a bulge under his jacket that could only be a weapon. He was staring at Isabella like she was prey, and it took everything she had not to flinch. Alessandro. Marco's voice was surprisingly soft, touched with an Italian accent much stronger than Alessandro's. Thank you for coming. And you brought the lady prosecutor. How interesting. Marco.
Dante.
Alessandro nodded to each of them, his hand never leaving Isabella's back. I appreciate you agreeing to meet. Sit. Marco gestured to the chairs across from him. We're all friends here, no? The lie hung in the air like smoke, but Alessandro and Isabella sat. Alessandro positioned himself slightly in front of her, a subtle but clear message of protection. So, Marco said, lighting a cigar, you want to talk about Vincent Marchetti? I want to talk about the fact that you've been having me followed, and that your people have been surveilling Miss Romano. Alessandro's voice was calm, but Isabella could feel the tension in his body. I want to understand what you hope to accomplish. Marco took a long pull on a cigar, studying them through the smoke. What I hope to accomplish, Alessandro, is to protect my interests. You've become unpredictable, cutting ties, refusing deals, and now this. He waved his cigar at Isabella. Sleeping with a federal prosecutor who is building a case against you? Some might say you're either very stupid or very bold. I'm in love with her. The words came out of Alessandro's mouth so naturally, so convincingly, that Isabella almost believed them herself. And yes, she was investigating me. She's been removed from the case due to our relationship. She's no longer a threat to you or to me. No. Dante spoke for the first time, his voice rougher than his uncle's. Because from where I'm standing, she's a threat to all of us. She knows too much. She's seen too much. And love, he spat the word. Love is a weakness we can't afford. Alessandro's hand moved to Isabella's thigh under the table, squeezing gently. A warning to stay quiet. Isabella knows nothing about your operations, Dante. My businesses with your family have always been kept separate from my personal life. Really? Marco leaned forward. Then she doesn't know about the shipments coming through your port facilities? The storage units your real estate company provides? The consulting fees your tech companies pay to our shell corporations. Isabella's blood ran cold. These were exactly the connections she'd been looking for, laid out like a confession. Her phone was in her purse, recording everything. If she could just… No, Alessandro said firmly. She doesn't know any of that. And she won't, because as of 6 months ago, all of those arrangements ended. The port facilities were sold. The storage units were closed. The consulting fees stopped. He met Marco's eyes. I've been trying to tell you this for a year, Marco. I'm out. I'm going legitimate. And I'm not coming back. The silence that followed was deafening. Dante's hand moved toward his jacket, and Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. But Marco held up one finger, stopping his nephew. You think it's that easy? Marco's voice was dangerously soft. You think you can just walk away from the family after everything we've done for you? After your grandfather's legacy, after the protection we've provided, after the money we've made together? I think, Alessandro said carefully, that the world is changing, that the old ways are dying, and that if you're smart, Marco, you'll start planning your own exit strategy instead of dragging me down with you. Dante pulled his gun. The movement was so fast that Isabella barely registered it before the cold barrel was pressed against Alessandro's temple. Alessandro didn't flinch, didn't move, but Isabella felt his hand tighten on her thigh. Nobody talks to my uncle like that, Dante snarled. Dante. Marco's voice was sharp. Put the gun away. Uncle, he's disrespecting you.
Put
the gun away. Marco's eyes never left Alessandro's face. Alessandro is right. The world is changing. But that doesn't mean we can let him walk away without consequences. Dante lowered the gun, but didn't holster it. Isabella could hardly breathe. What do you want, Marco? Alessandro asked, his voice still remarkably steady. I want insurance. I want to know that if you're going legitimate, you're not going to turn state's witness. That you're not going to sell us out to save yourself. Marco's smile was cold. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me something valuable. Something that proves you're still bound to us, that you still have skin in the game. What kind of something? Marco's eyes slid to Isabella. Her. Isabella's breath stopped. Not her life, Marco continued, almost conversationally. I'm not a barbarian, but she's a federal prosecutor. She has access to case files, to investigation reports, to sealed documents. I want her to provide us with information. And as long as she does, as long as she proves she's compromised and can't be trusted by her own people, then we'll leave both of you alone.
No.
Alessandro's voice was flat. Absolutely not. Then there's no deal. Marco spread his hands. And I'm afraid that means you're both problems that need to be solved. Dante's gun came back up, this time pointed at Isabella. She stared down the barrel and thought, absurdly, that she should have told her mother she loved her more often. Should have taken that vacation to Italy. Should have never gotten on Alessandro's plane. Wait. Alessandro's voice was sharp. There has to be another way. I'll give you money. Property. I'll provide protection for your shipments for another year. Anything but this. I don't want money, Alessandro. I want leverage. I want to know that you're bound to us in a way that can never be undone. Marco's expression was almost pitying. You say you love her? Prove it. Prove you're willing to corrupt her, to drag her down into your world. Do that, and we'll leave you both alone. Refuse and… He shrugged. Well, you can imagine. The room was silent except for the sound of Isabella's racing heart. She looked at Alessandro, saw the anguish in his face, and realized what was happening. Marco was forcing him to choose. Isabella's life or her integrity, her safety or her soul. There's a third option, Isabella heard herself say. Everyone turned to look at her. Alessandro's eyes widened in warning, but she ignored him. She'd spent her entire career fighting men like Marco Vitali. She wasn't going to stop now, even with a gun pointed at her head. What option? Marco asked, sounding almost amused. I don't give you classified information. Alessandro doesn't compromise himself. And in exchange… She took a breath, praying she was making the right choice. In exchange, I stop investigating. Not just the RICO case, All investigations into Vitali family operations. I recuse myself from any future cases involving you or your associates. I become, effectively, useless to the federal prosecutor's office when it comes to organized crime. Isabella, no. Alessandro started, but she cut him off. It's my career, Alessandro. My choice. She looked at Marco. I walk away from organized crime prosecution. I transfer to white-collar crime or corporate fraud or anything else. And you get what you want, protection from someone who knows too much. The only difference is that my integrity stays intact, and so does my relationship with Alessandro. Marco studied her for a long moment. You would sacrifice your career? Everything you've worked for? I would sacrifice it to save lives, yes. Including my own. Isabella lifted her chin. But I won't become a corrupt agent. I won't betray my oath. And if that's not good enough for you, then pull the trigger, because I'd rather die with my integrity than live without it. The silence stretched out. Dante looked at his uncle, awaiting orders. Alessandro looked like he was barely breathing. Then Marco laughed. It was a genuine laugh, full of surprise and what might have been respect. Madonna, he said, shaking his head. No wonder you fell for her, Alessandro. She's got balls bigger than most of my soldiers. He waved at Dante. Put the gun away. We're done here. Uncle. I said we're done. Marco stood, brushing ash from his suit. Miss Romano, you have a deal. Transfer away from organized crime prosecution, and we'll consider your debt to Alessandro paid. As for you, he looked at Alessandro. You want to go legitimate?
Fine. Go.
But if you ever, and I mean ever, cooperate with law enforcement against my family, this conversation never happened, and the truce ends. Capice? Capice? Alessandro agreed, his voice rough with relief. Marco walked toward the door, then paused. Alessandro? She's good for you. She makes you remember what honor looks like. He smiled slightly. Don't fuck it up. Then he was gone, Dante following like a shadow, and Isabella and Alessandro were alone in the room full of cigar smoke and the ghosts of deals made and broken. Alessandro turned to her, and the emotion on his face was so raw it hurt to look at. You just destroyed your career for me. I saved our lives, Isabella corrected. There's a difference. Isabella. Don't. She held up a hand. Don't apologize, don't thank me. Don't do anything except get me out of this building before I start shaking so hard I can't walk. Alessandro pulled her to her feet and into his arms, and Isabella let herself collapse against his chest. She could feel his heart hammering, could feel the fine tremors running through his body. They stood there for a long moment, two people who'd just stared down death and somehow survived. I meant what I said, Alessandro whispered against her hair. I love you. I know it's insane. I know we barely know each other, but I love you, Isabella Romano. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saving mine. Isabella pulled back just enough to look up at him. In his eyes she saw truth, desire, fear, and hope all tangled together. And she realized that at some point in the past few days she'd stopped seeing him as the enemy and started seeing him as just Alessandro. Complicated, dangerous, trying desperately to be better than his past. Human. Take me home, she said softly. To your apartment. And Alessandro. She rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. I love you too. God help me, but I do. The drive back to Alessandro's apartment was silent, both of them processing what had just happened. But when they reached his door, when he pulled her inside and pressed her against the wall, there was nothing uncertain about the way they came together. It was desperate and hungry and inevitable, months of denial and attraction finally spilling over. They made love that night with the desperation of people who'd faced death and survived, with the tenderness of two souls recognizing each other across an impossible divide. And later, wrapped in each other's arms as the Chicago skyline glittered through the windows, Isabella realized that she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. She'd fallen in love with the enemy, and somehow, impossibly, that enemy had become her salvation. 3 months later. Isabella and Alessandro just survived the most dangerous night of their lives, and they've confessed their love for each other. But what happens next? How do they build a life together after everything they've been through? If you're invested in their story, and I know you are, hit the subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me. Do you think they made the right choice? Could you sacrifice your career for love? Let's find out what happens 3 months later. Isabella stood in her new office at Morrison and Associates. The view of Manhattan spread before her like a promise. The plaque on her door read Senior Counsel, White-Collar Crime Division. And while it wasn't the organized crime unit she'd dreamed of leading, it was still a good position. An honest position. One that didn't require her to compromise her integrity or put a gun to anyone's head. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alessandro. "Dinner tonight? I have news." She smiled and replied, "Your place or mine?"
Yours.
"I'll cook." Isabella laughed. Alessandro's cooking skills had become a running joke between them. The man could negotiate with mob bosses and run a multi-billion-dollar empire, but he couldn't make pasta without burning it. God help us both. "I heard that was offensive," he texted back, and she could practically hear his smile. The transition hadn't been easy. Marcus had been furious when she'd requested the transfer, had accused her of throwing away her career for a criminal. The media had gotten wind of their relationship. Federal prosecutor falls for billionaire under investigation. And the coverage had been brutal. Her father had needed 3 conversations before he'd even agreed to meet Alessandro, and that first dinner had been so tense Isabella thought someone might actually throw a punch. But slowly, impossibly, things had started to work. Alessandro had opened his books voluntarily, allowing an independent audit that confirmed what he'd been claiming all along. His current businesses were clean. The connections to his grandfather's past were there, yes, but buried deep enough that they couldn't sustain a RICO case. The new prosecutor assigned to investigate him had quietly closed the file 6 weeks ago. Alessandro was free, and so was Isabella. That evening, she arrived at her apartment to find Alessandro already there. He'd had a key for 2 months now, surrounded by grocery bags and looking adorably frustrated. "I can't find your garlic press," he said by way of greeting. "I don't have a garlic press. I chop it with a knife like a normal person." Barbarian. But he was grinning as he pulled her in for a kiss. "Hi. Hi yourself." She wrapped her arms around his neck. "So, what's this news?" Alessandro's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "Let me cook first. It's the kind of news that deserves good food." "You mean it's the kind of news I'll need fortification for?" Isabella translated. "Possibly." They cooked together, or rather, Isabella cooked while Alessandro attempted to help and mostly just got in the way. It was domestic and normal and perfect, and Isabella still sometimes couldn't believe this was her life. That this man, who'd walked into her conference room like a threat and turned her world upside down, was now chopping vegetables in her kitchen and arguing about whether oregano was the same as basil. Over dinner, surprisingly edible chicken piccata and only slightly burned garlic bread, Alessandro finally told her his news. "I've sold Caruso Enterprises," he said quietly. Isabella's fork stopped halfway to her mouth.
What?
"Well, most of it. I'm keeping the foundation and a few of the tech companies, but everything else, the real estate, the shipping, the import-export businesses, I've sold them to a consortium of investors. The deal closes next week." "Alessandro." Isabella set down her fork. "That was your empire. Everything you built." "Everything I built on blood money," he corrected gently. "Isabella, I've been thinking about what you said that night in Chicago. About how blood doesn't wash off. You were right. I could spend the rest of my life trying to make those businesses legitimate, trying to distance myself from my grandfather's legacy, but I'd always know where it came from. I'd always be one phone call, one favor, one old connection away from being pulled back in." "So you're walking away?" "I'm walking towards something better."
He took her hand.
"The foundation does good work, real work that helps people. The tech companies are clean, venture-backed, with no connections to my past. I can build something new with those. Something that my children, our children if we're lucky, won't have to apologize for." Isabella's heart skipped. "Our children?" Alessandro pulled a small box from his pocket, and Isabella's breath caught. "I had a whole speech planned," he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring. "About how you're the bravest person I've ever met. About how you looked at the worst parts of me and saw possibility instead of just darkness. About how you literally put your life and career on the line to save mine. But the truth is simpler than all of that." He slid out of his chair and knelt beside her, and Isabella felt tears start to stream down her face. "Isabella Romano, you are my redemption. My conscience. The reason I believe I can be better than my past. I love you with everything I am, everything I was, and everything I'm trying to become. Will you marry me?" Isabella couldn't speak, could barely breathe. She looked at this man, this complicated, dangerous, surprisingly tender man, and saw their future spread out before her. It wouldn't be easy. The past would always be there, shadows that would occasionally creep back in. There would be questions from their children, judgments from strangers, moments when she'd wonder if she'd made the right choice. But then she looked into Alessandro's eyes and saw the truth written there. He loved her. He'd changed for her. He'd given up everything he'd built to be worthy of her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Alessandro slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her so thoroughly that they forgot about dinner entirely. They spent the rest of the night talking about the future, about where they'd live, Alessandro's penthouse, which had better security and a much better view, about the wedding, small, intimate, just family and close friends, about what Isabella's father would say when they told him, probably something involving threats and background checks. Later, lying in bed with Alessandro's arm wrapped around her waist and the city lights casting patterns on the ceiling, Isabella thought about the journey that had brought them here, about the conference room meeting that had started everything, about the party where she'd seen glimpses of the man beneath the reputation, about Chicago and the moment she'd realized she'd rather die with her integrity than live without him. "What are you thinking about?" Alessandro murmured against her hair. "How 6 months ago, I thought you were the enemy. And now I think you're the most dangerous thing that ever happened to me." She turned to face him. "Because you made me question everything I thought I knew about right and wrong, about justice and redemption. You made me believe that people can change, that love can exist in the spaces between the black and white." Alessandro's thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized was falling. "You made me believe I deserved to change, that I was more than my grandfather's legacy. That's a gift I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of." They made love again, slow and tender, and Isabella thought that this connection, this impossible love between a prosecutor and a reformed mobster, was its own kind of justice. A proof that no one was beyond redemption, that love could conquer even the darkest pasts. 2 years later. The wedding had been beautiful, a small ceremony in the Hamptons with 50 guests, Isabella in a simple white dress, Alessandro in navy blue, and both of them crying through their vows. Isabella's father had walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and while he still wasn't entirely comfortable with Alessandro's past, he'd admitted that any man who loved his daughter that much couldn't be all bad. Marco Vitali had sent flowers with a note that read simply, "Best wishes for your happiness. MV." Dante had been arrested 6 months ago for racketeering and would spend the next 20 years in federal prison. The Vitali family was in decline, the old ways finally catching up with them. Alessandro's foundation had expanded, now operating education programs in 12 cities and providing millions in scholarships to at-risk youth. His tech companies were thriving, 2 of them acquired by major corporations for valuations that made Isabella dizzy. They'd kept his Chicago apartment but sold most of his other properties, preferring to travel light and give the money to causes they believed in. And now, standing in the nursery of their penthouse apartment, Isabella looked down at the tiny person in her arms and felt her heart expand to impossible sizes. "She has your eyes," Alessandro said softly, appearing beside her. "And your stubborn chin," Isabella replied, smiling down at their 3-week-old daughter, Lucia Rose Caruso. "God help us." Alessandro wrapped his arm around her waist, and they stood there together, watching their daughter sleep. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. Giving up the organized crime unit? Everything you worked for? Isabella thought about it, really thought about it. She'd given up a lot. The prestige of being a top prosecutor, the adrenaline of high-stakes cases, the satisfaction of putting dangerous criminals away. But she'd gained so much more, a partner who challenged and supported her in equal measure, a family built on love and hope rather than fear and obligation, and a life that proved redemption was possible. No, she said honestly. I don't regret it. I found something more important than winning cases. What's that? I found you. She looked up at him. And I found out that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about giving people a chance to be better. Sometimes it's about love. Alessandro kissed her forehead. I love you, Isabella Caruso. I love you too. She looked back down at their daughter. And we're going to love her so much that she never has to choose between right and wrong. She'll just know.
How?
Because we'll teach her. You'll teach her that no matter where you come from, you have the power to choose who you become. And I'll teach her that love, real love, means believing in someone's ability to change. They stood there as the sun set over Manhattan, a former prosecutor and a reformed mobster, holding the tiny life they'd created together. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos, sirens and car horns and the endless motion of millions of lives intersecting. But inside their penthouse, there was peace. Isabella thought about the day Alessandro had walked into her conference room, arrogant and dangerous and impossibly magnetic. About the moment she'd realized he was more than his past. About the night in Chicago when she'd chosen love over career and integrity over corruption. She thought about all the rules she'd broken, all the lines she'd crossed, all the impossible choices that had led her here. And she realized that she wouldn't change a single thing. Because this love, this family, this life they'd built together, was worth every risk, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt. Thank you, she whispered. For what? Alessandro asked. For being worth saving. For proving that love can change everything. For giving me this perfect life. Alessandro pulled her closer, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby in her arms. Bella, you saved me. Every day of my life, you save me. I'm just grateful you saw something worth saving. As night fell over the city and their daughter slept peacefully between them, Isabella realized that this was her happily ever after. Not perfect, not simple, but real. Built on trust and transformation, on the belief that even the darkest pasts could lead to the brightest futures. And as Alessandro dimmed the lights and guided her out of the nursery, his hand warm and steady in hers, Isabella thought about how strange and wonderful life was. How the man she'd been determined to destroy had become the man who'd shown her what it meant to truly live. She'd set out to take down a billionaire mobster and ended up falling in love with a man trying to be better than his past. It wasn't the story she'd planned to tell, but it was the one she'd gotten. And she wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Come to bed, Alessandro murmured, pulling her close. In a minute. Isabella looked back at the nursery door, at the soft glow of the nightlight, at the promise of tomorrow. I just want to hold on to this moment a little longer. We have forever, Bella. I know. She smiled up at him, at this impossible man who'd changed her life in every way that mattered. But forever starts now. And I don't want to miss a second of it. They walked hand in hand to their bedroom, two people who'd found love in the most unlikely of places. And as they fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the city sparkled below them like a constellation of second chances. Because that's what they were, Isabella thought as sleep claimed her. Two people who'd been given a second chance at redemption, at love, at life. And they were going to make it count. Every single day. And that's Isabella and Alessandro's incredible journey from enemies to soulmates. What a ride, right? If you love this billionaire mafia romance, please smash that subscribe and like button. It helps us bring you more premium stories like this one. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next audiobook. We've got more steamy billionaire romances, mafia stories, and enemies to lovers tales coming soon. Now I want to hear from you. What was your favorite moment? Was it their first kiss? The dangerous meeting in Chicago? Or that beautiful ending with baby Lucia? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing what resonates with you. And if you binged this whole story, you're definitely going to want to check out our playlist. I've linked it in the description. More addictive romances are waiting for you. Thank you so much for spending the last few minutes with us. Your support means the world. Until next time, keep believing in love, keep believing in redemption, and I'll see you in the next story. Ciao, Bella.